Shabbat Shalom, everyone. As we've been saying much of the morning, this is Shabbat Shira. It's a special Shabbat. It's a celebratory Shabbat. And we celebrate many things in the course of this Shabbat. But right now, in this moment, I want us to focus on the celebration of Miriam. The fact that while we are reading of the Song at the Sea, Miriam steps into her leadership of the Jewish people. It's happening at the same moment. Once we get through reading in the Torah of the song that we sang, we get to the end of the song, then the Torah tells us, now Miriam does something unusual. Miriam, Moses and Aaron's sister, picks up a drum. And right as we finish the song, it says she goes out, starts to beat the drum, starts to dance, and repeats the same song. And we're looking at that thinking, well, it's interesting, but what just happened? Why is she doing it? Why is the Torah telling us about it? And then it goes on and says, the moment she starts, all of the women of Israel move toward her, likewise, with drums, with dancing, with singing, and repeating the same song. And now what's happened is a community of women has formed within the people. So the moment that we become a nation, immediately there is a woman leader and a community of women join her and form. And if we look at it and we think, what did she do that was different? Well, the first thing she did was she picked up a drum. A drum is only there to create a rhythm. It creates a repetitive rhythm that goes on and on and on, repeating throughout, underlining everything that's happening on top of it. A repetitive rhythm. The repetitive rhythm we all know that we function on and actually live on is our heartbeat. It's the drum roll, it's the repetitive rhythm that sits within each of us, that once it starts, it underlines everything we do. It always repeats with the same rhythm. We rely on it. And now the fact that Miriam picked up a drum and created a rhythm, and all the women immediately said, of course, picked up drums, created rhythms. It's a strong female image of a heartbeat because it is the female that we know creates life within life. And so when a woman is carrying a baby, there are two heartbeats that are going on inside of her. There are two rhythms of life that are continuously beating inside of her. They are never in conflict. It makes perfect sense. Miriam would pick up a drum. This is the birth of the Jewish people, and she is the one who recognizes it at that moment. The other thing we see is she's not calling the women. She's not standing there saying, all women, pick up drums. She's not saying a thing, because we wonder if she's even intending leadership. What she's doing is expressing herself. She sees what's going on, and she says, no, something's missing. And she picks up a drum, and she does it. And she does it to express herself. And then what happens is the women respond. They watch it, they connect with it, they respond, and they follow her. This kind of leadership we haven't seen before because she's not commissioned for leadership. God's not coming to her and saying, okay, Miriam, women, now, come on, get them together. God's not commissioning her to do this. No one is commissioning her to do this. This is natural leadership. This is organic. She is doing it to express herself. It is organically connecting with all the women are responding to it. Leadership has formed, and it's formed in a way we've never seen it form before. So we look at this remarkable woman and we say, okay, now I really, really want to take a close look. We start with her childhood. And what happens when Miriam is little, a very little girl, Pharaoh sends out that decree that says all baby boys that are born have to be thrown into the Nile, essentially sacrificed to the Egyptian god. They're all going to die. The Midrash says, so what happened? What did Israel do in response? All couples separated. Husbands left their wives. They were simply not going to risk it. They were not going to risk a pregnancy. They were not going to risk a birth because they could see what was going to happen. So they all separated. And then the Midrash says, Miriam, this little girl, turns to her father Amram and says to him, amazingly enough, you're worse than Pharaoh. She turns to him and she says, Pharaoh targeted one gender. You're denying both genders. By the fact that you have separated from your wife, not risking a pregnancy, you're not even risking girls could be born. You're simply taking Pharaoh's decree and making it worse. And then the Midrash tells us that her father Amram is convinced by her argument, reunites with his wife. All men reunite with their wives, and as a result, Moses is born. So if not for Miriam's argument, in fact, we wouldn't have Moses. And what happens is that now we're crediting Moses' birth to Miriam, this little girl who confronted her parents and said, "What are you doing? You can't do that." It is the birth of Moses that now is attributed to Miriam. And then after he's born, and his mother hides him for as long as she can, which is 3 months, and then takes him and puts him in this little ark and puts him in the Nile, and then leaves because she doesn't want to watch what's going to happen. And ultimately, we're told Miriam doesn't leave. She stands at the Nile. She watches her baby brother, and at that moment, she becomes his guardian. Because she watches that, first of all, he's not going to drown. She watches the daughter of Pharaoh come. She speaks up when she needs to. She reunites her baby brother with his birth mother so they can bond together. She's his guardian. And what she's done is she created the window in which he will live his life. It's all because of her. When we look at Moses, born when and where he was born, in Egypt, after Pharaoh gave that decree, he was destined to die in water, just like all the other baby boys of his generation were destined to die in water. That was Pharaoh's decree. It was the law of the land. And when we look at that, we realize he probably would have ended up that way, if not for Miriam. She intervened in his destiny. She opened a window long enough for him to live his life. Because her leadership is so organic, because it connects so much to the people, we're told in the Midrash that the people paid Miriam special respect. It says, while the flags are raised, for the whole time they are raised, they would not travel until Miriam would go to the front before them. And what the Midrash is referring to is how we wandered for 40 years in the desert. We're a nation. We got to figure out when is it time to pick up camp and when is it time to camp again. Every tribe had a flag. When it was time to move, God told Moses, Moses gave the signal. The signal would then ripple out from the center of the camp where Moses was through all the tribes. Every tribe that got the signal, when they were ready to go, they would put their flag up. And that way you could see when is everybody ready to go. And you would think it would work. Once all those flags are up, we travel. But now we're being told, not so fast. Because all the flags would be up, no one moved until they saw Miriam move from the center of the camp to the front of the camp. And then they would follow her. She is their organic leader. And even when God says it's time to move, we're not moving until she will lead us. And that is the respect that is being given to Miriam over and above anybody else. Everyone saw her as a leader, not just the women, the men as well, because the entire camp of Israel is not moving until Miriam is in the position to lead them to their next step. Then we ask the question, so why are we mentioning female leadership at all in the Torah, and why here? Why is it happening in this parsha? And we look at it and we start to look deeply at that song. What's going on in the song? We're coming through the sea. We're being born as a nation at that moment. And in fact, we're told the waters are standing up and we are moving through a dry area in the water, a dry canal in the water, moving toward becoming a nation. It's a birth image. We're emerging from the water by traveling through a dry canal. It's clearly female, it's a birth image. And then we look at the song, and the song is a war song. It's a victory song. And in fact, Moses says God is Ish Milchama, a man of war. And now we say, wow, look at that. In that one event, God is manifesting female and male. And it's happening simultaneously. And we look at it and say, there's our model, right there. That's why the Torah is telling us at this moment, when there is male leadership, Moses leading the song that is praising God as a man of war, there is female leadership because it happened in the same moment. And we now look at it and say, of course it would show us this. Our leadership mirrors what we're being shown of how God manifests. Moses and Miriam are singing the same words. They're singing the same song, but it's not identical. Miriam has picked up a drum, and she dances. It's nuanced differences, and we want the nuances. We want to hear those two voices of leadership side by side, because that's how God manifested. That's what we want to create the mirror for. When we look at Miriam and we say, okay, so what does her name mean? Because names are essence. All of Genesis told us that. So what am I doing with her name? And this is where it can get a little confusing, because if we track it through the Hebrew, we're going to end up with the words Mar-Yam. And that means bitter waters, a bitter sea. And now we're sitting thinking, but that's not what the text told us. Where am I getting that? Except when we track her name through the Canaanite root languages, not Hebrew, but we move to the ancient languages of the region, suddenly the root is different. Suddenly what we notice by moving through Egyptian core languages, that her name means lover of water. And now all the pieces start to fit into place. The Talmud tells us that as we are journeying through the desert, we have Miriam's Well. Miriam's Well is what gives us water in the desert. It's not a well that we're digging and somehow it's moving with us. Miriam's Well is a rock. And the rock is sitting there, and everyone is told, all of the representatives, one representative from each tribe is to come to the rock and with their staff draw a line from the rock to where their tribe is situated. And once all 12 lines are drawn, water would come out of the rock and it would run into that irrigation system that they had created, and now everybody has water. And the rock was called the Well of Miriam, Be'er Miriam. And it was to her credit. And the water image and the flowing water image fits perfectly with who she is. And then the Torah tells us she dies, and everybody says there's no water, because Miriam's well has stopped. As we continue reading, there's no water, and everybody's complaining to Moses, what are we going to do now? God turns to Moses and tells him, go back to that rock. Talk to it. Get it to give its waters. Moses goes, and through frustration, through anger, through whatever word we want to put to it, he hits the rock. And now disaster happens. Because now God says to Moses, we're done. Because you just did that, you will not enter Israel, you will die. And a death decree is now pronounced on Moses. And we look at it, and all of the pieces come cascading in. Miriam was his guardian. She's gone. And that window she opened up for him to live his life isn't there anymore. She's not his guardian anymore. And because she is not there to intervene, his original destiny kicks back in. He was destined to die at an event with water. Where all of the generation of his died in the Nile, he had a window to live his life, but an event of water will now actually bring to him the pronouncement of his death. We look at all of it and we realize all these pieces are lining up, and they're lining up in exactly the way we would expect to see them. But we look at Miriam and we realize here's what she did that was so astounding. She answered Cain's question. When we go back to Genesis, to the very beginning with Cain and Abel, and God turns to Cain after he kills Abel and says, where's your brother? And Cain says, am I my brother's keeper? And then God doesn't answer the question, and the question gets left open, and then we meet Miriam, who becomes her brother's guardian. And she says, yes, I am. I am my brother's keeper. And because she answers it, we get Moses. And because we get Moses, we get redemption. We get the birth of a nation. We get everything. Because Miriam answered Cain's question. Because she answered yes to that question, the Jewish people become a nation. The world changes forever because of the actions of a little girl with a steadfast heart, a soul that simply wouldn't be denied. She unapologetically was who she was. She stepped into those moments to express herself. She created organic leadership we'd never seen before. We bonded with her in a way we did not bond with other leaders. We respected her. She sustained us. She gave us the understanding that guardianship will open windows of life for the people around us. We celebrate Shabbat Shirah as an expression of our redemption from slavery and suffering. But we have to also remember to take a moment and celebrate the uniqueness of our first woman Jewish leader, Miriam. Shabbat Shalom.